Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Maya.
And I'm Ethan. It's wonderful to have you with us today. Whether you're listening while driving, cooking, walking, or simply relaxing, thank you for spending some time with us.
Have you ever spent 10 seconds doing something and then spent 10 hours thinking about what people thought of it?
I think almost everyone has. You send a message, post a photo, answer a question in a meeting, or even wave at someone who doesn't wave back. Then your brain starts writing stories.
Exactly. Did I sound awkward? Were they judging me? Did I say too much? It's amazing how quickly our imagination can become our worst critic.
And here's the strange part. Most of the time, the other person has already forgotten the moment. Meanwhile, we're replaying it over and over.
Today's conversation is about something that quietly affects almost every part of life. Stop caring so much about what other people think.
Not because other people never matter. Their opinions can sometimes help us grow. But when every decision depends on someone else's approval, we slowly stop living our own life.
That's such an important difference. There's a huge gap between listening to feedback and living for applause.
Absolutely.
So why do we care so much? Why does one small comment sometimes stay in our minds for days?
Well, psychologists believe part of the answer goes back thousands of years. Human beings survived because they belonged to groups. Being accepted meant safety. Being rejected could mean danger.
So our brains still react as if social rejection is a life or death situation?
In many ways, yes. Our modern lives have changed much faster than our ancient brains. Today, someone dislikes your opinion online, and your nervous system reacts as if you've been pushed out of the tribe.
That's fascinating. And honestly, a little comforting. Sometimes we blame ourselves for caring too much.
When in reality, it's a very human instinct.
But instincts aren't always helpful in modern life.
Exactly. We don't have to obey every instinct we have.
Let me ask everyone listening something. When was the last time you stopped yourself from saying what you really thought because you were worried about being judged? Maybe it happened this morning. Maybe last week. Or maybe it's become such a habit that you don't even notice anymore.
That's the key word, habit. People often think people-pleasing is part of their personality. Sometimes it's simply a habit that has been repeated for years.
Which means
habits can change.
I remember talking to a friend who loved painting. She had painted since she was a child, but she hadn't shared any of her work online. I asked her why. She smiled awkwardly and said, "What if people think it's childish?"
That's heartbreaking.
It was. Then I asked, "Have people actually told you it's childish?" She said, "No." "So who told you?" She paused. "No one."
That's powerful. Sometimes the loudest judge isn't another person. It's the imaginary audience we've created inside our own minds.
Exactly. She wasn't afraid of real criticism. She was afraid of criticism that hadn't even happened.
Psychologists sometimes talk about something called the spotlight effect.
That's such an interesting name.
It simply means we tend to believe people notice us much more than they actually do. We imagine everyone is paying attention to every mistake, but most people are busy thinking about themselves.
Which sounds funny.
It really does.
We're worrying that everyone is watching us. Meanwhile, they're worrying that everyone is watching them.
Exactly. It's almost like everyone is standing on their own little stage, convinced the audience is staring at them.
I wish more people realized that. I remember spilling coffee on my shirt before an important meeting. I was convinced everyone would notice. I spent 20 minutes trying to hide the stain. After the meeting, one colleague said, "You seemed distracted today." I asked, "Didn't you notice my shirt?" He looked confused. "What shirt?"
That's the spotlight effect in real life.
It really was. The biggest problem wasn't the coffee. It was the story I told myself.
Our thoughts often create more suffering than reality.
That reminds me of another expression I like: making a mountain out of a molehill.
That's a wonderful idiom. It means turning a small problem into a very big one.
And our minds do that surprisingly often.
Especially when emotions are involved.
Why do negative opinions stay with us so much longer than positive ones? If 10 people compliment us and one person criticizes us, why do we remember the criticism?
That's connected to something psychologists call negativity bias. Our brains naturally pay more attention to negative experiences than positive ones.
Again, because of survival?
Exactly. Missing one danger could have serious consequences. Missing one compliment, not so much.
So one critical comment can feel louder than 20 kind ones.
Yes. And social media makes this even stronger.
That's true. Imagine receiving 100 positive comments. Then someone writes, "This was boring." Guess which comment many people think about all evening?
The negative one.
Every single time.
Research suggests our brains often treat criticism like an emergency. But criticism isn't always an emergency. Sometimes it's just one person's opinion.
That's an important sentence. Not every opinion deserves a seat at your table.
I like that. Thank you. Actually, it reminds me of someone I met years ago. He had just started a small business. He designed handmade notebooks. He was passionate about them. But every new product took months to release. Not because the notebooks weren't ready, because he kept asking more people for their opinion.
How many people?
Friends, family, neighbors, former classmates, even strangers. Every suggestion changed his design. Eventually, the notebook looked nothing like the one he originally loved.
That's exhausting.
It really was. One day, his mentor asked him a simple question. Whose approval are you actually trying to earn? He didn't know.
Wow.
Think about that. If you're trying to satisfy everyone, you'll eventually lose yourself.
That's such a difficult trap because it feels responsible. You tell yourself, "I'm just being careful." But sometimes, you're actually avoiding your own decisions.
Exactly. There's a difference between gathering advice and outsourcing your confidence.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
Thank you.
I wonder how many listeners needed to hear that today. Have you ever delayed making a decision because you wanted everyone to agree?
And here's something interesting.
People often think confidence means not caring about anyone's opinion. I don't think that's true.
Neither do I.
Healthy confidence means knowing whose opinion matters.
That's a huge difference.
Imagine you're learning to play the guitar. Would you ask a professional musician for feedback? Or someone who's never touched a guitar?
The musician, of course.
Then why do we let random opinions shape our lives?
That's such a good question. Sometimes we treat every opinion as equally valuable, but they're not.
Exactly. Not everyone has earned the right to influence your choices.
That doesn't mean becoming arrogant.
Not at all. It means becoming selective.
I like that word. Selective.
Because emotional energy is limited.
If we spend it worrying about everyone, we won't have enough left for the people who truly matter.
There's another story I want to share. A woman started speaking English at work after years of avoiding it. She made mistakes. Sometimes she forgot words. Sometimes her pronunciation wasn't perfect. After one meeting, she apologized to a colleague. "I'm sorry my English isn't good." The colleague smiled. "I wasn't thinking about your mistakes. I was thinking about your idea."
That's wonderful, isn't it?
She had assumed everyone was judging her language. Instead, they were listening to her message. That's a lesson many English learners need to hear. People are usually much more interested in connecting with you than counting your mistakes. And honestly, that applies to life in general. People remember how you made them feel far more than the tiny imperfections you notice about yourself.
Absolutely. And there's another interesting psychological idea we'll explore next. Sometimes the reason we crave approval isn't because we want compliments. It's because we're trying to avoid discomfort.
That's such an interesting distinction.
Because avoiding discomfort can quietly become the invisible force controlling our decisions. Let's talk about that next.
I really want to stay with that idea for a moment because I think it's easy to misunderstand. When we say stop caring what people think, we're not saying ignore everyone.
Exactly. Imagine someone tells you that your car has a flat tire. You don't ignore them because you're living your authentic life.
That would be a very expensive lesson.
It probably would. Feedback is useful. Approval is optional. Those two things often get mixed together.
That's such a simple sentence, but it changes everything. Feedback helps us improve. Approval tells us whether someone likes us. Those aren't the same thing.
Right. Someone can disagree with your idea and still respect you. Someone can criticize your work because they genuinely want you to grow. But when we're desperate to be liked, every piece of feedback feels like rejection.
Which brings us to discomfort. You said earlier that people often seek approval because they're trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings. Can you explain that?
Of course. Let's imagine you're in a meeting. You have an idea. You believe it could solve the problem. But before speaking, your mind starts asking questions. What if it's a bad idea? What if they laugh? What if I sound inexperienced? What if everyone disagrees?
Suddenly your heart starts beating faster.
Exactly. At that moment, staying silent feels safer. Not because silence helps you, because silence removes the uncomfortable feeling.
So your brain learns something.
Yes. It learns, whenever I stay quiet, I feel relief. That relief is powerful. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a cycle of avoidance. Every time we avoid discomfort, the fear becomes a little stronger.
That's interesting, because the relief feels like success.
It does, but it's temporary. Imagine avoiding every difficult conversation. At first, life seems peaceful, but eventually, small misunderstandings become bigger ones. Avoiding discomfort today often creates bigger discomfort tomorrow.
That's true in relationships, at work, even in friendships.
Exactly. Courage usually feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding.
I wish someone had told me that years ago. I used to think confidence came first, then I'd take action.
Most people think that.
But now, I think it's the opposite. You act while feeling nervous, and confidence slowly catches up.
That's been my experience too. Confidence isn't usually the starting point, it's the result of repeated action.
Almost like building a muscle.
That's a perfect comparison. You don't become physically strong before lifting weights. You become strong by lifting them.
The same applies emotionally.
Exactly. Every time you survive a moment you were afraid of, your brain collects evidence. I did it. I survived. It wasn't as terrible as I imagined.
And that evidence slowly becomes confidence.
That's right.
There's another question I'd love everyone listening to think about. Whose voice do you hear when you're criticizing yourself? Really think about it. Does it sound like you, or does it sound like someone from your past?
That's such a thoughtful question, because many of our fears didn't begin with us. Maybe a teacher embarrassed us. Maybe a parent expected perfection. Maybe classmates laughed at us once. Our brains remember emotional experiences surprisingly well.
Which means sometimes we're trying to avoid being hurt by people who aren't even part of our lives anymore.
Exactly. The situation changed years ago, but the emotional habit stayed.
That reminds me of someone I met at a community workshop. He wanted to start making videos. Not professionally, just as a hobby. Every week he'd say, "I'll begin next month." Finally, I asked him, "What's stopping you?" He looked embarrassed. Then he said something I'll never forget. "When I was 14, I gave a presentation at school. I forgot my words. Some students laughed. I still hear them."
Wow.
He was in his 30s. One moment from his teenage years was still making decisions for him.
That's incredibly common. Our brains don't always separate the past from the present. Emotionally, old memories can feel very close.
So, what happened? Did he ever make those videos? I'm hoping you're going to say yes. He did. But not because his fear disappeared. He simply decided that his future mattered more than one painful memory. His first video wasn't perfect. Neither was the second. But after a few months, he laughed and said, "You know what's funny? Nobody reacted the way I imagined."
That's such a beautiful turning point. Sometimes we're carrying fear that belongs to a younger version of ourselves.
That's such a compassionate way to see it. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" maybe we should ask, "What happened to me that taught me to be afraid?"
Exactly. That question opens the door to understanding instead of self-judgment.
And understanding creates room for change.
It does.
Earlier, you mentioned that we should become more selective about whose opinions matter. How do we actually do that? Because it sounds simple, but in everyday life, it's difficult.
I use a very practical question. When someone gives me an opinion, I ask myself, would I trade lives with this person?
That's interesting. Explain that.
If someone is living with integrity, if they have qualities I admire, if they've achieved something meaningful in the area they're commenting on, then I listen carefully. But if someone constantly complains, judges everyone, and seems deeply unhappy, why should they become the author of my self-worth?
That's such an eye-opening way to filter opinions.
It helps me separate noise from wisdom.
I also ask myself another question. Does this person know the whole story? Because people often judge one tiny moment. They don't see everything that led to it.
Exactly. Someone watches a 30-second clip online and believes they understand your entire personality. Life doesn't work like that.
We all make quick judgments. It's part of being human. But we don't have to build our identity around those judgments.
That's an important distinction. Other people's opinions are information. They are not your identity.
I love that. Information, not identity.
Here's another thought experiment. Imagine carrying a backpack. Every time someone criticizes you, you pick up a stone. One person doesn't like your clothes. Another dislikes your career choice. Someone else questions your dreams. Soon, your backpack becomes incredibly heavy.
Until you're exhausted.
Exactly. Now imagine stopping for a moment and asking, who put this stone here? Do I actually need to carry it? Sometimes the answer is no.
I think that's one of the hardest skills in adulthood.
Learning that not every emotional burden belongs to us.
That's true.
Some opinions should be considered. Others should simply pass by, like clouds in the sky.
I like that image. Clouds come and go. You don't chase every cloud.
And you don't argue with every cloud either.
That's surprisingly good advice.
Thank you.
You know what I've noticed? The people who seem the freest aren't the ones everyone agrees with. They're the ones who have accepted that disagreement is part of life.
Absolutely. No matter what you do, someone will approve, someone won't.
You can wear formal clothes. Someone calls you boring. You can dress casually. Someone calls you careless.
You can stay quiet. People think you're shy. You can speak confidently. Someone says you're talking too much.